Hello, my pretties. So this is incredibly fascinating to me. And by the way, I don't get into politics very much, but sometimes I do. But most of my website is actually more on natural health, natural healing, financial freedom, and that's at tomberkenmeyer.com. Just to get that out of the way, tomberkenmeyer.com, just like it's spelled here on social media. So here's the interesting thing. Once upon a time, Donald Trump, I call him President Pinocchio now, for obvious reasons, the habitual lying. But years ago, I guess it would have to be at least 3, 4, 5 years ago now, I used to think of him as a great, smart businessman. But boy, was I wrong. Holy shit. And but there's still a lot of people today, we'll call them MAGA people, who still think he is a smart businessman. Well, some information has just recently come out, even without his tax returns that he promised he'd show us. And that is, apparently he has lost more money and has been monetarily a bigger business failure than every American in the country. Like, that's a literal statement. Now there's 330 some odd Americans. I don't know how many are minors, so we'll say somewhere between 2 and 300 million people have beat him in this measurement. That fascinates me. So Donald Trump is literally monetarily the worst businessman in America. There's literally not one other American that has done worse than Donald Trump. I think that's hilarious. It also makes me feel like a schmuck because years ago, I thought he was a smart businessman. I really, truly did. And I knew about the corporate bankruptcies, but those are corporate bankruptcies. And smart businessmen, sometimes they use those actually for a down-the-road financial gain. But here's what we learned about Trump recently, even without his tax returns, which he still hasn't released. And that is, all those losses that he took, and I guess there were much more than just 6, there were hundreds of them, throughout the 80s and the 90s, those never gained a profit. They all went bankrupt. They all went belly up with the exception of one business. I think it was in 1987. Some project he actually did make money. And so, but even in that 1 year where he had one project that made money, all of his other projects lost money. And that one winning hedged against all of those losers was still a loss that year. So literally every freaking year he lost money, and he is the biggest loser in the United States without any exception, literally, not one other American. So the argument that is already being spun on Fox News, shame on those guys. Not a news organization, infotainment, that's the real fake news, holy shit. But their explanation is, wow, what a smart businessman. He's so creative and he's done so much with these losses, and it's okay to take a loss at first if you make money eventually. And I agree with that. He does real estate, I do real estate. Every time I do a real estate deal, it's a loss at first. And then depending on what happens, maybe a year later, maybe several years later in that particular deal, I don't start to make any positive cash flow until some time has passed, a year, several years later. I've got some properties right now where I still haven't made money yet, a positive money, several years after I closed on it. But they're all cash flowing positively, which is great. But for the debt that I got into and the down payment that I had to make, that's still considered a loss. And certainly the purchasing year for taxes, it's almost always a loss. I think every single one of my properties has been a loss for tax purposes every single year, as well as real monetary gain or losses, a loss every single year. But they're all positively cash flowing, and in due time, when they catch up to what I paid on the down payment and maybe things that happen with those properties, they eventually make money. So lo and behold, I am a smarter businessman than Donald Trump. And as an individual filer, so are you, because he is literally the worst, the biggest loser in America. So if you ever need a little pick-me-up, you can just say to yourself, wow, I'm a smarter business person than Donald Trump, even if you've never owned a business, because you haven't lost as much as he has. I just think that is so funny. It can also be a little depressing too, but I'll take the funny aspects. I'd rather be happy than sad. So even if you don't have any experience like I do with real estate, and knowing how debt and taxes and depreciation, the magic of capitalization works over a scheduled depreciation rate, even if you don't know about those things, and it's normal and common and typical to take a loss at first, you can still read about it and determine, yeah, Donald Trump really is the worst, the dumbest businessman ever, and the biggest loser by objective monetary measurements beyond every other American without exception. That still blows my mind. Even just saying it out loud just blows my mind. So there you have it. Now, MAGA people, I'd imagine he'll lose a few supporters, but somewhere between 25 and 35% of the country is going to be with him no matter what. I guess I'm curious to see what spin they take on it or what mental gymnastics they do to continue to support him. Because remember, when he ran for president in 2016, the credibility that he ran on, his 100% of his credibility he ran on was being a smart businessman. And as it turns out, there's literally not one American tax filer or one business that has lost more money than Donald Trump. So he is literally the rock bottom, and he ran his entire credibility on being a genius businessman. So holy shit. And now he runs the United States, and it's been consistent because since he's been president, he's increased the national debt by over $2 trillion in less than 2 years now, which is record break. Obama never increased the debt that much. And what did MAGA people say? Obama was terrible for the debt, worst president ever. Well, okay, if that's true, then Trump is worse than Obama because he increased the debt at a faster rate than Obama did. So by that standard, by the MAGA people's own logic, and I actually agree with that logic, to be honest with you, as one measurement, he's the worst. And it follows suit with all of his business dealings in the past, with the exception of one project going back to 1987 or 85, one of those 2 years. But that's like 30 years ago. You have to go back to the last time he ever made any money. Now, one other thing to add to this is we still don't have his tax returns for the more recent years. And my guess is just since in more recent years he was basically selling his name, his brand, he probably did make money, maybe a substantial amount. Who knows? We won't know until we see his tax returns. But then what happened to that money? It's not because he made good business deals in real estate or traditional business. It's just a name brand. He built up a brand for himself, and he's able to sell those rights to people to put it on their products or whatever. What an easy, great way to make money that would be if we could all do that. But I would imagine he did make money doing that. And who knows if he squandered that away or not, or who knows what. We won't know that until we see his tax returns. But there you go. I think that's incredibly fascinating to find out that, as a matter of fact, the man who campaigned on his entire credibility was being a genius businessman, he's factually the biggest loser in the United States of America. There is not one single citizen in the entire fucking country that lost more money than Donald Trump, President Pinocchio. Credibility out of the water. So you MAGA people, how are you going to spin it? Or are you going to be more principled and just say, yeah, I was a schmuck, and I guess he's not so great after all. I imagine a few will take that, but I would imagine most of his hardcore supporters, the ones that are still left anyway, I mean, you got to figure, if you're going to support the man through all these massive lies that he's already told, I got to figure that the majority of you are going to stick with him through no matter what he does at this point. Because anybody with any kind of brain cells that they can rub together to form any free-thinking critical thought has already abandoned him. So the ones that are left, I'd imagine the mass majority of them are going to still stick by him no matter what. He could kill somebody on Park Avenue like he once alluded to, and he'd still get their support, which is pretty sick. So, I mean, if that's, for those of you that have that position, MAGA people, that you'll support him no matter what, through thick and thin, then it would be nice if you would just come clean and say, you don't really care about thinking for yourself. You're fine surrendering all of your critical faculties to the biggest monetary loser in America, who leaned on his dad. That's the other thing I left out that I forgot, but I'm bringing it up now. He's such a loser that he leaned on his dad the entire time through all of those losses, and that's the only reason he was able to skate by and eventually build a brand for himself that he could sell in the 90s and more recent years. So biggest loser ever, and not an independent man. He was codependent on his dad through all that time, and his dad was really good at making money. Terrible human being and a racist, but he was very good at making money, a businessman. He must have looked at his son, Donald Trump, and thought, God, what a fucking loser. How did I make that? I can't imagine what his dad must have thought of him in the later years, watching him fail business after business, money after money suck after money suck. But, his dad kept shelling out and kept giving him. And that's who Donald Trump is. So the neediest, greediest, the biggest habitual liar, the biggest loser in America is now our president of the United States, and we got another election coming. So I'll cap on this note. There's the biggest problem with money or politics is the money in politics. Large private interests by politicians, and then the politicians return that favor and legislation in their favor against everyone else. So that's corruption. That's institutional money corruption. And so that also guarantees that those same donors are going to keep donating for the next campaign cycle. Donald Trump ran a campaign promise saying he would never take establishment money so that he would never owe them any favors. Well, he's taken well over $100 million. MAGA people suck on that. He's taken over $100 million of money from the establishment, and he's been currying favor with them ever since, which has driven the debt up another $2 trillion to give to all those donors. And now they're back, and they're giving him more money. And they're giving many of the same donors are also giving Joe Biden lots of money, who's trying to run against him, but hopefully he'll never get the nomination. So if it does come down between Trump and Biden, they're working for the same donors. I don't care who you vote for, Trump or Biden, you're a bunch of suckers, man. A bunch of suckers voting for a status quo to remain the same and telling the establishment that, yeah, we accept this because we're going to vote for Biden or Trump. And, shame on anybody who does that, seriously, at this point, this late in the game. But I don't think it's going to be Biden versus Trump. I think it's going to be Bernie Sanders versus Trump. So my suggestion to you, a little action step to get out of this mess, is find out who the non-bribed politicians are. People like Andrew Yang, who's running for president, Tulsi Gabbard, who's running for president, and Bernie Sanders, who's running for president. Look at those three. They don't take any large private interest money, no corporate PAC money, no lobbyist money. So they are untethered, and they won't owe any favors. Unlike, Donald Trump, who lied. He's a fake populist. These guys are the real deal. They've got the track record of not taking any and fighting against it. And actually, they want to go further and amend our Constitution with a 28th Amendment, ban all private money from politics, even the little donors, all of it. Just get it all out once and for all. And by the way, that's something that over 90% of the country wants money out of politics. That includes most Republicans, most independents, most Democrats. We want it out. And Bernie, Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang, all running for president 2020, they want a constitutional amendment, 20th Amendment, getting it all out. So that's something that unites actually the whole country. The only people against that would be President Pinocchio, and most of Congress for that matter. So find out who the non-corrupted, the non-bribed, it's legal, so the legally bribed, find out who they are. I just dropped 3 names: Andrew Yang, Tulsi Gabbard, Bernie Sanders, all running for president. And vote for them. Vote for them in the primaries so we don't have to deal with a Biden versus Trump, because if it's Biden versus Trump, then, we lose anyway. We've already lost before the election takes place. But if it's a Bernie Sanders versus Trump, or Tulsi Gabbard versus Trump, or Andrew Yang versus Trump, oh baby, that would be sweet. So get out in the primaries and vote, and make sure it's Bernie. I'm gonna vote for Bernie, because he's got the 50-year track record of a consistent policy position. Bernie doesn't do the standard pivot that all the other politicians do, depending on if they're going from primary to the general. No, he's consistent, and that says a lot. All right, I think I'm done now. Feel free to share this and drop your comments. I'll come back and I'll read them later, and maybe I'll interact with some of them. And have a great day, everybody.